This interview is being held May 22nd, 2017 in Granbury, Texas. I am Penny Galt, and I am a member of Mary Isham Keith Chapter, National Society of the Daughters of the American Revolution. I will be interviewing Father David Walton Cardona, a veteran of the Navy. Also in attendance is Dawn Needles, a member of Mary Isham Keith. Okay, David, where were you born?
I was born in Fort Worth, Texas.
Okay, when?
September the 4th, 1952.
What was your father's full name?
My father's full name was Moses A. Cardona.
And what did he do for a living?
My dad was the longest part of his career was at General Dynamics. He started when it was Convair, and then they were making at that time the B-58, and he was there as in contracts administration at GD, and worked through the B-58 program, the F-111 program, and then the F-16 program when he retired. So
B-58, was that a bomber?
the B-58 Hustler was it was a sort of a delta wing bomber, really kind of the Cold War designed probably to carry a nuclear weapon, but probably could carry other sort of conventional bombs. But it was a supersonic aircraft and 4 big engines on it, and they made it in Fort Worth, near Carswell Air Force Base.
What was your mother's full name?
My mother's full name was Beverly Jean Hellman Cardona.
Okay.
She was the daughter of the District Attorney of Fort Worth, Stuart Walton Hellman, and Gussie Lee Jones was my grandmother. And my dad's parents was Benny Cardona and Condita Cardona. So I'm sort of a Heinz 57. My grandmother on my dad's side was born in Cuba. My grandfather was from Mexico. My grandmother was a Jones, and my grandfather Hellman was a German. And a lot of family stories about older great-grandparents. One of Granddad Schneider used to always say, they'd tell him to look both ways before he crossed the street, and he would always say, no, Dave ain't for me. How paths cross. My grandfather Cardona he was a baker and made Mexican sweetbread, and my granddad Jones was in the real estate business, and off of North Main there was a place where they both at one time had an office before they even knew each other existed. And the story about Granddad Jones was that he would come out with a business partner, and they would look and see if they could read the clock on the courthouse tower, which was smaller than the head of a pin. But they got out there and they bet, I can't read it, and they checked their watches, no, you're wrong. So Granddad Jones started drinking carrot juice, to the extent that the palms of his hands and the soles of his feet and the whites of his eyes turned orange. It never helped.
But he did all he could.
He did all he could. So.
Did your mother work?
My mother worked worked for a company called Air Accessories. If you were driving down Fort Worth and you look at Henderson Street as you go south towards Harris Hospital, there is a building there that's got a kind of big tower on it, and it says Public Market. And I think it was a farmer's market there at one time, and across the street from it is now a building that's been remodeled, but it was the Dr. Pepper bottling plant. And she worked at Air Accessories. It was a company that made boat windshields. And she was interested in the arts, and so she volunteered with the Fort Worth Arts Council as a secretary, and at one point in her career she got named to be the manager of the Fort Worth Symphony. And she did that for about 8 years. And then she was then the manager of the Fort Worth Opera, the business manager, for about 9 years. So right in there, I may have the dates, but both the Fort Worth Opera, Fort Worth Symphony, she was the business manager for both of those organizations.
Oh.
So
Very busy.
very busy, very busy.
Do you have any brothers and sisters?
I have a brother John, Andrew Cardona, and a sister Mary Jane Cardona Lopez. I have 2 other brothers, Philip, my brother Philip, passed away at age 4 from a congenital heart defect. They would call them blue babies. He had a hole between the ventricle, and Dr. Denton Cooley was one of the first doctors who was trying to work on that particular issue. And my brother Philip at age 4 was about, I don't know, 2.5 feet tall, and just didn't make it through the surgery. But hopefully they learned a lot, working with him. My other brother, James, was adopted. We adopted him about 2 years after my brother Philip passed away. And he struggled with learning to speak English and those types of things. Eventually became a very good student, and but ended up in the Navy. He did 2 tours as a signalman, so he had a real seagoing rate. And unfortunately met a girl who he thought they were going to get married and all this kind of stuff, and he was sending money home so they could buy a house, and she was spending it as fast as he could send it home, and came home on leave one time and found out all this had happened, and he took his own life. So it's unfortunate. So
I'm sorry for your loss.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, are you married?
I am married.
Okay.
Married to Paula Ann Stevens Cardona. She currently works at the First National Bank here in Granbury. And I have 3 children, a son Ted, my daughter Sarah, and my son Philip. And all 3 of them live here in Granbury. And Sarah is a nurse at Lake Granbury. I guess they call it Lakeside Granbury. They've changed the name so many times. The local Granbury Hospital. She works in the OB-GYN postpartum. So she gets to be with the babies and do that kind of thing. So she got her bachelor's of BSN from Tarleton. And which is where I went to Tarleton, and have 2 degrees from Tarleton State. And my son Philip is working on a degree in information technology, and my son Ted is a journeyman electrician getting ready to take his exam for be a master electrician.
Well,
so
very accomplished.
Very accomplished.
That's great. What were you doing before you entered the service?
I was going to high school.
Oh, okay.
I was 17 in 1970, and my mother was, I remember being in the living room. My mother was a very precise kind of person. She wanted her house to look a certain way, and we had an upstairs, and at the bottom of the stairs was a little deacon's bench, and there were some books sitting there. And she said, "Be sure and take those books upstairs before you go." And I said, "Mom, I'm late for school." And I had to take my brother John with me and drop him off. We were going to Episcopal High School. And she was brushing my sister's hair. And she says, "You're not that late. Take those books upstairs." I said, "Mom, I'll get them I'll get them tonight. Nobody's going to be here in the house. It'll be empty. Nobody will know those books are going to be there." She goes, "I'll know." I said, "Mother, I'm gone." And she took the brush and she took it and hit me right in the sternum with those composite brushes.
Yeah.
It stung. And she goes, "Why do you have to be this way?" I said, took the brush away from her, threw it across the room. I said, "I'm going to school." So I took my brother, dropped him off at school, and started to go. He goes, "Where are you going?" He said, "I'm going to go join the Navy." So I went downtown and enlisted. Of course, I was 17, and my parents had to sign. Well, I thought I was just going to go in for 4 years, but they talked about the nuclear power program in 6 years hitch as opposed to a 4-year hitch, and that sounded great to me, and all the promises and stuff the recruiters make. And so my father signed for it, and I went off to boot camp, flew off to San Diego. I was on what they call a cash program. So this was all happened back in April, and I didn't leave until July. And sometime during my boot camp experience, when you're going to find out, what your rating is going to be and all that stuff, they said, okay, and I said, you're going to be a dental technician. I said, well, what about the nuclear power program? And he says, well, that's all been changed. Well, I talked to my dad, and my dad's told me the story that he talked to the recruiter. When he found out it was a 6-year hitch, he talked to the recruiter and says, look, I signed for 4 years, not for 6. So you either change it to a 4-year hitch or you send my son home. And they changed it, so I ended up doing 4 years as a dental technician in the Navy. So went to San Diego, was in company 297, recruit company, and really kind of uneventful, very exciting kind of experience. Everybody has different stories or remembrances of their drill instructors, and I had a drill instructor that didn't want to be a drill instructor. Boilerman Chief Luft. He was from New Jersey, and he would always say, I told yins. I done told yins. And he was very good. He'd come up and he'd slap you in the back of the head and knock your white hat off. And I remember one time we were standing in formation, he got up, hit this kid next to me, I don't know, 7 or 8 times. Every time he hit him, he'd catch his white hat, put it back on his head, he'd slap him again, and it'd come off. Finally, he moved on. He got tired of knocking his kid's hat off. And so anyway, I ended up being the male petty officer. So I would go, that was a relief just to get away from the company area. Got to go across the grinder, go pick up the mail at the post office and bring it back.
The grinder.
The grinder is where we were all marching and did our drill and stuff like that. Big, probably 10, 12 acres of asphalt. Mm-hmm. And in San Diego, it never rains in Southern California. And we heard that song, and we knew that well, it doesn't. And I can remember looking out the chain link fence out on Rosecrans Avenue thinking, what the heck have I done? And but we got through it. Wonderful experiences of going to firefighting school, and we were in firefighting school. I can remember they had a steel building and concrete, and it had these 3 compartments. And the center compartment was full of diesel fuel that they would set on fire. And as you're talking, they have the windows open, and you see this black smoke billowing out, but it starts coming down, 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 down. And the instructor's going down, down, down. And so we're finally down on our all fours, flat on the ground. He says, okay, let's all crawl out of here. So we did that. Well, then they set it up again. They aired out the building, and as it turned out, I was going to be the nozzleman. I would have the fire hose nozzle, and I had about 6 guys behind me. And I was supposed to say, flank across. So he started this thing, and we're on one side, and we flank across. And I said, give me 2 feet of slack. And so they gave me 2 feet of slack, and I opened the nozzle, and I was supposed to go up and down, and the guy on the other side went side to side. Nobody told us that when that cold water hit that fire and it cooled it off, this black smoke of that diesel dropped like a curtain. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face, much less breathe. And then I was supposed to tell these 6 guys to flank back across. I think I said something like, oh, it was terrible. But then the next part of that was being on top of the metal roof, and our shoes melted. That's how hot it was. Our shoes melted to this steel deck they had up there. But it says, this is nothing. We can put this out. Imagine you're out in the middle of the ocean and a ship's burning. So it gave you a little bit of experience of what you might come up against. But in a controlled situation. But I remember having my dungaree shirt I had to throw away because, I'd wiped my nose and there was this black soot that it never came out. So I had to, every time I'd go to, I think I went to one inspection with that one, they looked at it and said, get rid of that shirt. So
Diesel fuel is kind of greasy, isn't it?
Greasy,
Yes.
black, stuff. It just was never come out. And we went to the rifle range. I enjoyed doing that. And it was just, I enjoyed marching. At first, it's a bunch of individuals all out there marching. By the time you get through the end of boot camp, it was like one person out there that would just respond. And they would give these very complicated things, right obliques and left obliques and double reverses and stuff like that. And nobody missed a beat. It was just like one entity out there marching around. It was great fun, great exercise. And I can remember when we finally got our designation as to what we were going to do. And I was going to be in A school in San Diego for dental technician, A school. So I went home on leave and saw, friends and school teachers, and they just looked at me at the big change. You come back and you're this lean, mean fighting machine. But it was funny, I can always remember I took my hat off and there was this tan line around the top of your head, where the top of your head is white.
Right.
And then you're tan all the way down, the tops of your ears are sunburned and peeling, but boy, you're healthy, you feel good, and it was a great experience. A school was exciting. I had done well in high school in biology, so the sciences became kind of natural for me. Enjoyed doing A school, learning the different things you need to do as a dental technician, and that went very quick. And we finished A school and right around the turn of the year. So I think it was January. I think I went home for Christmas and then left Fort Worth and flew out to Annapolis, Maryland. And I was originally stationed to be at the Naval Station at Severn River, which is across the river from Annapolis. And somebody said something about there being there's an opening for a dental technician at the academy. And I put in for it and got it. And so moved over to the Naval Academy. We stayed, the enlisted barracks was called Ricketts Hall. And at that time, and probably still, there was a large contingent of Filipino stewards that served in the mess hall for the midshipmen. And talk about government waste. If a midshipman wanted, they would bring out, there'd be like 8 guys at a table, and then say if they're having T-bone steaks. They would put a platter of T-bone steaks out there and food, just unbelievable amounts of food. If a midshipman wanted another steak, he would hold up the platter and the steward would come and get it, and instead of just putting 1 steak on there, they'd put 8 more steaks. Well, after the meal, if there were still 8 steaks there, they didn't have leftovers. That all went in the dumpster. And we saw a couple of times where Filipino stewards who had, large families got written up, captain's mast and stuff, because they had been taking steaks that were going to go in the trash and took them home to feed their family.
And they got in trouble for taking that.
Misappropriation of government stuff.
Really?
So it was okay to throw it in the garbage, but you couldn't give it to kids that were hungry. So that was when I started kind of get a sense of how the military worked. But we had got there, and each year the incoming class of plebes would come in, and there was usually 1,000 per class. There was about 4,000 in the total midshipman corps. And 1,000 in each class, roughly. Some, as you got to be a senior, those numbers kind of dwindled away. People had either passed out or failed out or whatever. But each time they would come through, you'd have their dental exams. You did full mouth x-rays, panorexes. They got their teeth cleaned, got examined to see if there had any work to be done. So each year we had learned how to do oral prophylaxis, how to clean teeth, that kind of thing. And they'd had us scheduled, I think it was 3 midshipmen an hour, which gave you roughly 30 minutes, if that, 15, 20 minutes to do a prophy. Mm-hmm. And not a real fancy, great job, just hit the big pieces of calculus and next guy in. We'll get it the next time they come through. So I worked doing that, taking full mouth x-rays. And after you've done 1,000 x-rays, you know, that first plebe summer, you get pretty good at being able to do x-rays, you know, and all the other things that we had to do just because of repetition, you know, 1,000 guys coming through. And the way that it was set up was you have all the midshipmen coming in as going to school, but then you also had the retired officers had come in. Fond memories of the academy, that kind of thing. So they moved to Annapolis and they would get their work done there at the dental clinic. So I worked on kids barely out of high school all the way to officers who had retired years and years ago. One that was really, that I can remember, I was working in the prosthetics clinic. We had a Captain Dodd. Captain Dodd had been a naval aviator, but he flew off of the battleship of Texas. And I said, "You flew off the battleship of Texas?" I said, "How did you do that?" He says, "Well, they had 2 catapults on the back of the ship, and they would launch us off." I said, "Well, terrific. How'd you get back on? Did you have to land on the catapult?" He said, "No. What they would do is we would radio as we were coming back in. They would turn the ship, and as they turned the ship, on the lee side of that turn, that water just got like a mirror. And we would land on that smooth water and then taxi up next to it, and they had a crane that came down on the top of, these are like biplanes.
Oh, okay, so, yeah.
And they had a big hook on the top of it, and they would come down with this crane. The thing would go through the hook, and they'd pick the plane up and set it back down on the catapult. And
never heard of a plane taking off from a battleship.
From a battleship.
Aircraft carriers, yes, but not.
So they would do advanced observation and reconnaissance.
Okay.
Because they could get up high and see what was the battle group, because usually had the battleship, and then there would be tenders and destroyers and cruisers and things like that along with the battleship group. And the aircraft would go up and see, make sure that they weren't getting ready to head into something over the horizon. Right. And so I asked him, I said, "Well, did you know, that battleship Texas is down there in Texas and Galveston, and did you write your name or anything like that?" And he says, "Well, he says, my compartment was right underneath the catapult. And when the catapult would do, it would kind of bend the deck and stuff, and it just wasn't real watertight. So when we took some heavy seas, right above my face, there would be water dripping in." I said, "Well, what'd you do?" He says, "Well, I took a piece of chewing gum and I plugged it up there, and I took a pencil and shoved it in there and broke it off in there." He says, "I think eventually they painted over that. So if you go and look in those berths, if you see a kind of a bulge there, so that's probably that piece of gum that I stuck
Oh my goodness.
So Captain Dodd, and we worked on him. And I also had a midshipman named Daniel Wildfong. He went on to go into naval aviation and was a Top Gun fighter pilot and everything. It's not a very common name, Wildfong. I was at St. Vincent's Episcopal Church up in Bedford, Texas, and they had a school. And I remember coming in and I see this attractive lady with a little girl, and they're registering for school. And I hear the name Wildfawn, and I just thought, what the heck? And I went and introduced myself, and I said, you don't have a husband named Daniel, do you? And she goes, well, yes, I do. I said, will you tell Daniel that David Cardona from the Naval Academy is the priest at this church, and I expect to see him up here. And so it wasn't a week or so later, Daniel came to church, and it was interesting. He had a whole big story to tell about what he had done. So, but we lived in the barracks, and then they also had what they called BAQ, comrades, community rations, and BAQ I think was board and probably community rations, where they would pay you to live off base. They would give you the money that they would have spent in you staying in the barracks. And it was tough because there was such a cultural difference. All the Filipinos were speaking Tagalog or whatever the dialect is in the Philippines, and here we got maybe 7 or 8 Anglos living in there, and we didn't know what they were saying. And the accents were very difficult. Like I remember my dad would call, and what they would say is, they would say your last name and tell you to lay down to the lobby because you have a phone call. It would come over the PA, and it would come out, Cardona, lay down to the lobby, you got a phone call. I said, what did he say? They'd go, you got a phone call downstairs. I said, really, you got that from that? I said, yeah. So finally we moved off base, and a couple of us shared an apartment and lived off base, and it was a good duty. Because of my parents, my mom's love of history. She's a big Civil War history buff. If you're in Annapolis, you are within an hour's, a day's trip of Gettysburg and Antietam and Cold Harbor, where my great-great-great-grandfather had been wounded, and the Wilderness and Shenandoah Valley, and all those battlefields of the major battlefields of the Civil War were very accessible. So I enjoyed doing that. And my uncle lived in New York City, and Washington D.C. there was the Metroliner, and so I could get on the Metroliner and go up to New York and spend the weekends with my uncle up there. So, but being there at the Naval Academy, there were so many things that took place. I think the first time that I ever saw what they call a Harrier. A Harrier is one of those vertical takeoff and landing jets. It came, and there was a big intramural football fields outside of Bancroft Hall. Bancroft Hall was the big 4 or 5 story barracks that all the midshipmen lived in. And I can remember going up the stairs from the dental clinic. The dental clinic was right across from the sick bay and right outside of the dining hall. 4,000 guys got fed at once in this cavernous dining hall, and there was sort of a ramp that came down, and but we went upstairs and stood up on the top of the building and watched this jet come and just land on the football field, and then just took off straight up and then turned and gone like a shot. Just incredible.
What year was this?
This is, I was there from 70, I went in 70, I got there in 71. I left in probably May of 74.
Okay.
And so being able to see those kinds of things, we got to go to graduation at least 2 or 3 times because they wanted to have medical personnel at the stadium for the graduation. So you get to see the midshipmen all throw their hats up in the air. That was a very exciting thing to be. You see that in Life magazine and in movies, but to actually be there to see that and share in that tradition was it was exciting. I think, like I say, I went in when I was 17, I got out when I was 21. And, but we experienced so many different, the traditions and stuff of the Naval Academy. There's a thing during their plebe summer where they put, I think it's a plebe's hat, white hat. It has a blue rim around it, and it gets put up on top of this tall granite spire that is greased. And the midshipmen all have to help each other stand on each other's shoulders and stuff to get up there and retrieve the cap. And to watch that happen, and the teamwork and stuff that goes along with that. The chapel there at the Naval Academy is an Episcopal chapel, and the services that are conducted there sort of ecumenical, but primarily of the Anglican persuasion, so it was very familiar for me growing up in the Episcopal Church to be able to go do that. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, in the crypt of the chapel is John Paul Jones is there. And so just history. You'll look around and you'll find, you hear about the halls of Montezuma, the shores of Tripoli. Well, the Tripolitan pirates, the war with the Tripolitan pirates, they used stone cannonballs. They were probably about this big around, and there were 2 or 3 places around around the campus where there'd be these granite balls that had been used as cannonballs instead of lead or steel. They were stone. And so those would be there. There were cannon, deck guns from big wooden sailing ships, things like that. We actually had one time a diesel submarine, not very big. They were able to come up the Severn River because they didn't draw very much draft. And we got to go aboard the diesel.
Now, what year? When would this have been used? When was the submarine?
This is World War II.
World War II. Okay. Okay.
And the tail end of World War I and World War II.
Okay. Okay.
What they would call a diesel boat.
Okay.
They use a diesel engine to drive it, but it also would charge the batteries and stuff so that they could submerge. It was so different when they had the nuclear powered submarines come. They couldn't come up the Severn River. They had to be out in the Chesapeake because just the conning tower that you could actually see above water was probably what a diesel boat would have drawn the entire boat. It was probably like a 4-story building underneath the water line.
Oh my goodness.
Gigantic, big enough to have, what do you call them, ballistic missiles on board, big ballistic missiles. And so they would make where we could go, and they would take what we call motor whaleboats and go out, and we were able to have tours on the submarine. And it was nice to be able to have that kind of access. And the other things that they would do was basic seamanship. They would teach, if you could take a course, learn how to sail a sailboat. And these were 30, 40 foot long sailboats. It would take a 3-man crew. And so once you took the course and you had a card that says you could do that, you get 3 guys, you could go check out a very nice sailboat and go sailing on the Chesapeake Bay. And just a lot of nice things about the academy and the history and the things that were there. All this is going on at a time in the history, where we're in Vietnam. That's starting to wind down. You're meeting midshipmen who are graduating, seniors, or getting ready to go into either the Marine Corps or as line officers into the regular Navy. And some of those guys I know went on to the river boats that would be on the Mekong Delta, those kinds of things. Other guys were Navy SEALs, that kind of thing. And it's just interesting as you meet these guys. You see Navy SEALs on TV today, and they look like older guys, and yet when you're at the academy with these guys, you realize they're 20, 21, 22. I mean, they're kids. I was a kid, and I often tell people, I says, one of the things that I wish we had in this country, it would be a compulsive draft. I think it would be a great thing. I was 18 years old and was a third-class petty officer and had guys that were under me. I was responsible for and doing those kinds of things. And at the age of 19 and 20, I think today you got 19 and 20-year-olds, and most of them are sitting around with their cell phones, texting one another. And I'm going, what else are you going to do in life? So I think that's a real loss. There's the kind of things that happen. Some of the are apocryphal stories. Guys coming home to DFW airport in uniform, proud to be in your uniform, and people, calling you baby killers and stuff like that. And I says, I don't think I've killed any baby. I think I might have cut a midshipman's gun when I was cleaning his teeth, but I don't think I've killed any babies. But just the whole disrespect for the military at that time, and we were out of Vietnam by 75, and I got out in 74 and started going to college. It was a great benefit for me. Being a Texas veteran, I had the GI Bill, so I was able to get my undergraduate degree. Being a Texas veteran, there's a thing in Texas called the Hazelwood exemption. The Hazelwood exemption, basically, you can go to any state school in the state of Texas, and they will defer your tuition. So I got a master's in counseling psychology from Tarleton, you get 150 semester hours. And it's a great benefit because if I didn't use it, I could have given it to my sons to use. Unfortunately, none of my kids wanted to go to school, so I still have 100 and some odd hours. It was a 48-hour degree, so I still got 100 hours worth of deferred tuition. I'm thinking about, it would be for my own vanity, to go and get a PhD in counseling or something, but I'd have to drive up to Denton. So I don't know if it'd be worth it to do that. But that whole experience, looking back at age 65, looking back at where we were as a country, it's a big change. How veterans are treated now as opposed to how veterans are treated then. But some of the things like the Hazelwood exemption, the GI Bill, I bought a house. I was able to pay off that house, and they sent me the GI Bill that I can buy another house. They sent me another certificate and says you paid that one off. Here, if you want to buy another one, here's the certificate again. So I encourage, every time I see someone, I said, think about going to the service. They're always worried about going and getting shot at. I said, nobody ever shot at me in anger, and there's a lot of ways of serving your country without necessarily having somebody shoot at you. Somebody had to clean those guys' teeth. Somebody had to fill those cavities and make partial. I mean, it was a skill I had learned and enjoyed doing it.
Right.
So.
Right. And had you planned on being in the service, or was it just because you got upset with your mother that day?
I was upset with my mother that day, but I had been thinking, because, you talk about having school counselors, that they're supposed to help you plan your future. Right. Yeah, right. I had no idea what I was going to do. I knew about that age, I had a vocation. I think I knew I wanted to be a priest. And I thought, what better way to prepare myself of dealing with a broad range of people that I don't get to choose. who comes to church here.
Right.
Certainly in the service, you didn't get to choose who you were going to work with. Who did you share a bunk space with? There were guys from places I'd never even heard of. There were places, certainly there were some racial tensions and stuff that were there. There were guys from Kentucky and Tennessee, and I remember even midshipmen sometime would come through, or the enlisted people would come through, and it's like, where are you from? And they'd tell me some little old podunk town in West Virginia, and I go, okay, this is a toothbrush. Here's how you use it. It's like they'd never brushed their teeth in their whole life. I was lucky you'd go to clean their teeth, and you'd have to hold the tooth to clean it because they were falling out of their mouth, So it was a good thing, because we would do education, teaching about oral hygiene and stuff. It's been one of the benefits that I have. I realized I got one set of teeth that's got to last me my whole life. Brush, floss, do what you're supposed to do, and you'll have your teeth. But we'd have guys come through and they said, no, they'll just pull them all out. I'm tired of fooling with them. And I'd have to explain. I said, well, how old are you? I'm 25. I said, oh, golly, dude, you don't want to do that, because by the time you're 45, your mouth won't support a lower denture. Now today they've gone where they started doing the inserts, and you actually have something to anchor a lower denture to. But back then that technology hadn't gotten there yet. So, but I think the overall experience of being with different people that I didn't get to choose, dealing with officers. There were some officers there who we're still friends with. My friend Ed Vandal has stayed in touch with Dr. Lamarche. Dr. Lamarche was one of the operative dentists, and he's retired down to Florida. And Ed Vandal goes and, because he retired, what Ed will do is, when the weather gets cold up north in Ohio where he is, he goes to Florida where it's warm, and then he can golf his way back up. He'll spend every base that has a golf course. He and his wife go. They'll play golf for 3 or 4 days, and then they'll go to the next base that has a golf course. And he's done that 2 or 3 times, and then he heads out west to the West Coast and does that. So there's a lot of advantages to being in the military. The importance, I think, of serving your country. It's not always pleasant. It's there was some stuff that was kind of mindless stuff. It's like what was the thing I learned to do? Oh, I learned how to buff a floor. There's guys who learn how to scrape rust off of a ship, how to use red lead and paint. Well, those are things that have to be done, or the ship will rust through and sink. Somebody's got to scrape rust. Somebody has to paint. Is it a pleasant task? No. But if we're going to have ships at sea that are equipped and ready to go into harm's way, you gotta maintain. It's just like changing the oil in your car, rotating your tires. I mean, those are things that have to be done. Right. And so I learned a lot of things that, you look back on it and see that wasn't very pleasant, but gosh, there's a lot of worse things that could be. You hear tales of guys that worked in the black gang, down in the engine rooms and stuff. I mean, my gosh, you can't hear yourself think. It's hot. It's dangerous. There's moving parts that, you get your shirt sleeve caught in something and it'll suck you in to some big moving machine, and they'll never, I think this was Dave, So, but it was a great experience.
Well, I thank you for sharing your experiences with us. There is never service that is too small.
Yeah.
You don't always have to be the guy on the front lines shooting the gun.
Somebody's got to load the bullets.
To be of importance, that's right. And we
or
certainly,
cook a meal.
Right. We thank you for your service. The country thanks you for your service.
Thank you.
And the Daughters of the American Revolution have gotten together with the Library of Congress for this Veterans History Project. And the Library of Congress has issued